Hello. Welcome to Weencast, Ween Off the Cuff, Riverdale, Season 1, Episode 1, Don't Worry, Darling. I am your Ween. Now, I'm behind on my work recapping the 100 because this semester has been beating the life out of me. And I'm sad about it. Don't worry. Work goes on. But in the meantime, to fill the content gap between my long form work, I'm introducing a new segment called Ween Off the Cuff, where I report to you on what was the newest episode of Riverdale like within no less than 5 minutes after I finished watching it. And so, without further ado, let's talk about it. Many of you are probably aware of the fact that somehow we had all survived the comet, but somehow it was the 1950s. Somehow we were all teenagers again, and somehow only I, Jughead, remembered, which was, of course, the end of last season when Cheryl's attempt to destroy Bailey's comet, which was speeding down towards Riverdale to destroy it due to the curse of an evil wizard from Puritan times named Percival Pickens, somehow resulted in the Riverdale crew being sent back in time to the 1950s and becoming high school students again, yet again, yet again. And that's where we pick up. That's where we pick up right where we left off in this episode, premiere of season 7, Don't Worry, Darling. And here is the news that I think is going to blow the skin of your face right off and leave the raw muscles and nerves exposed to the cold night wind. Much of this episode is a very special episode about the death of Emmett Till. I'm gonna let that sink in for a minute. I know what you're thinking. Gosh, the murder of Emmett Till was one of the most well-known and absolutely horrific crimes ever committed in the name of American racism, besides all the other ones, like slavery and all the other ones. And gosh, I'm worried Riverdale doesn't have the tone or the the rhetorical means or the writing heft or anything anything required to grapple with such profoundly serious, disturbing subject matter. And you would be right. And you would be right. But God help Roberto, he didn't let that stop him. He did not let that stop him. So we open Jughead in 1950s pops, listen to jukebox, looking askance, typing on his fucking massive typewriter. Because he doesn't have a laptop anymore because it's the 1950s. He lives in an abandoned train car all alone. Because in the 1950s, he just doesn't have a family. Like, back in regular times, he at least had a neglectful family. But, in the 1950s, he just has Hot Dog the dog. And he lives in an abandoned train car. And all of Riverdale's, like, POC students have just gotten back from being in Mississippi to witness the trial of Emmett Till and protest with the NAACP and stuff. And they're all understandably looking kind of down. But that's just that we can't linger on that because there's so much more to cover. After all, Archie's mom is confiscating the keys to his car because she's worried he's going to die like James Dean. And that's a storyline with equal importance in the construction of this show. Also, Cheryl has a different brother now. His name is Julian. He's not as creepy looking as Jason, but he is a real ginger. And by a real ginger, I mean he doesn't have any goddamn eyebrows. I can say that. I'm a ginger. I don't have any goddamn eyebrows. It's disgusting. Um, and the principal of Riverdale High, Principal Featherhead, is the same the same actor as the Leopold and Loeb Juvenile Justice Center warden from season 3, who was part of the Gargoyle King cult and tortured Archie in homoerotic wrestling pits and then drank poison because he was part of the Gargoyle King's cult. So we'll see how that pans out in the long term. But in the short term, he won't let Betty, the editor of the school paper, publish Tony's article reporting on Emmett Till's death and the trial of his attackers and how they were acquitted in a terrible miscarriage of justice. Not because he is willing to admit that he's necessarily racist, but because he feels like that sort of content just simply isn't appropriate for young people. And we're gonna get into that later. Um, oh, and there's a new student at Riverdale High, and she's a beautiful Hollywood starlet named Veronica Lodge, whose parents, Hiram and Hermione, star in their own 1950s sitcom called Oh Mija, which is obviously like a common affectionate term in Spanish for your daughter, but is also the thing that Hiram would call Veronica in all the early seasons in like a weirdly charged, vaguely incestuous way. Oh, Mija. Anyway, Veronica arrives and she's at school and she's sexy and she's from Hollywood. She's straight off of Ryan Murphy's Hollywood. Um, and when she comes into the classroom, Archie sees her and he's blown away by her. And we're supposed to understand it as he's like swept away by sexual attraction. Maybe we're supposed to understand on one level, on the surface level, we're supposed to understand that he's blown away by sexual attraction. But absolutely, and I may get busted for saying this, but I just say it nonetheless. Absolutely, the way he reacts to her is like he is a gay man who loves 1950s Hollywood star ladies, and he is amazed by her serve. To me, there's no other way to interpret the the expressions on KJ Appa's face, the clapping that he does after she speaks. He is he is not sexually attracted to her. He is moved by her absolute serve. And I think, based on the rest of the episode, we are closer to gay Archie than ever before. And we have only Roberto to thank for that. And obviously, upon Veronica's arrival, Cheryl hates her because, as Julian puts it later in the episode, Cheryl's no longer the hottest, most interesting girl at Riverdale. Now Veronica is the hottest, most interesting girl. And so she immediately has to do girl boss battle with Veronica, and they have a big fight when Veronica reveals she was friends with James Dean, and James Dean was bisexual, and Archie can't process this knowledge of male bisexuality. Probably bisexuality in general. He's from the 1950s, but either way, the experience of bisexuality, learning about it, just kind of blows Archie's circuits. While meanwhile, Cheryl has a freak out that's basically just QAnon level. You're a crazy pervert, Veronica, and everybody in Hollywood is a crazy pervert. And again, I think we'll get back to that. And then Jughead finds out that Bailey's comet is due in 2 years, so perhaps he could reverse this trapped in the 1950s and send them back to their real time, the future slash past slash future, um, by somehow interacting with Bailey's Comet again, but he's only got 2 years to plan. Now, back in the Emmett Till storyline, Tony and Betty go to Principal Featherhead to protest. You know, this is news that people need to hear. Tony wrote a beautiful article, and Principal Featherhead's like, "Yes, but our school psychologist, Dr. Werther's, and on one level, I do think he's named after the hard candies, which Werther's original, right? But I also think, based on what he says, this is a reference to Dr. Frederick Wertham, the famous censor of comic books who got all superhero comic books and horror comic books like burned in piles by deranged parents in the 1950s over the fear that they were perverting children, and led to the creation of the Comics Code Authority and the creation of more harmless comics like Your Old Archie, because Dr. Werther's says we can't publish this news story about Emmett Till. It's the delicate minds of youths can't handle this kind of disturbing knowledge. And Principal Featherhead says, and besides, these sorts of things don't happen in Riverdale. There's no racism in Riverdale. In fact, we were one of the first schools to integrate, which is mind-boggling knowledge that I may never finish processing. And so we find out basically that there's a strong undercurrent of save the children, save the children, save the children mindset in Riverdale, spearheaded by Dr. Werther's. And Betty and Tony are not deterred, though. Betty goes home to try and plead with her parents because both her parents are alive again. Her mom is here and her dad is alive again, and he is a radio TV news reporter. No signs of Polly or Chick or Charles, though, so I don't know if Betty has any siblings in the 1950s, but that's not really important right now. And Betty pleads with her father to say that to read Tony's article aloud on the evening news, or to do some kind of bit about Emmett Till. And Betty's dad is like, "Oh, sorry, kiddo. It's not relevant to us." I think is close to his exact words. And besides, the news channel RIVW is funded by Blossom Maple Syrup, and if we talk about racism on the air, the Blossoms will pull our funding. So we learn that Big Maple Syrup owns all the news, and they won't let people talk about racism. And that's important. That's important for us to know. Let's see. And Archie, meanwhile, is trying to figure out how to make Veronica be his girlfriend. But Jughead is not really paying attention to Archie's bullshit, which is fair. And he's thinking about, how can I get everyone back to the real time? How can we escape from the 1950s? And he he thinks, as Archie asks for a hammer, Jughead remembers that Archie back in 2019, which was 67 years ago, back in 2019, 67 years ago, Archie, when they graduated from high school, buried his dad's hammer in a time capsule that they put in an old-timey cooler that they buried on the football field right before they graduated and left Riverdale forever until they came back. And so Jughead thinks, what if the time capsule that we buried 67 years ago in the future is still here in Riverdale's football field? So he goes and he digs it up, and it's true. The time capsule from 2019 is here in 1955, and it still has all their things in it. Yes, 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 yes. And Jughead goes to show them everything that's in the time capsule, and they're baffled. And he tries to tell them about the future and smartphones and Spotify and stuff like that. And Jughead is telling them about what they did. Like, oh, Archie, you joined the army and you went to war, and Betty, you joined the FBI and hunted serial killers, and Kevin, you wrote some musicals. And We're in a cult. And Kevin's looking at the programs from the musicals that they did, and he's like, gosh, Hedwig and the Angry Inch? An inch of what? This really happened? And it's kind of insane because what Jughead is describing the last 6 years of Riverdale are akin and are akin to like fan fiction of Archie, right? And these characters who were all there with us for those last 6 years of dark Riverdale, dark Archie, they are now in their 1950s selves, their original selves, right? Their original Archie selves. They are reacting with like disgust and confusion and bamboozlement by what Jughead is saying. Like it's totally baffling to them. And so Archie is like, Jug, old pal, you're going off the rails, kiddo. And he drags Jughead away, and Jughead's like, no, Archie, you have to believe me. And Archie's like, why would, if this is what the future is like, why wouldn't we want to just stay in the 1950s, even if you're right, which you aren't because what you're saying is totally cuckoo bananas. And Jughead is crushed by the fact that it's a good chance he's going to get hauled off to the psych ward by Archie. Meanwhile, back in the other plot lines, I don't even remember what happens next. Oh God, um, it's already all blurring together. The Blossoms, their wealth, they own the news. They won't let anybody report on Emmett Till. Reminder that in fact, here in the 1950s, it's not better than the future, where everyone is a serial killer. Um, Penelope Blossom shows up for just one scene, but she delivers. Absolute queen mode. And then, and then Archie takes Veronica on a date because he sneaks his car out um to show her that he has a cool car. He's just as cool as Cheryl's eyebrowless brother Julian. And Veronica starts telling about Hollywood. And she's like, "Oh, I used to eat at the Brown Derby, but you know what? The food at Pops is so good. It's might even be better than what they have at the Brown Derby." And Archie's of course like, "What's the Brown Derby?" And Veronica's like, "Oh, it's a really great chain of restaurants in L.A. that Gloria Swanson's husband owns." And then Archie says, "Who's Gloria Swanson?" And Veronica realizes that he's the dumbest motherfucker alive. And then she says, "Well, who are you, Archie?" And Archie begins to describe his utterly, hysterically boring life in Riverdale. How he works on his car, and he goes to school, and he plays ball, and he goes fishing at the water side, at the Sweetwater River. And Veronica's like, "Oh, MG, do you ever skinny dip?" And he's like, "No, I'd never heard of skinny dipping before. You told me about it 3 scenes ago, and you're telling me about how you did it with James Dean, who's bisexual." And inadvertently, during that conversation, firstly, Archie reveals that his father, Fred Andrews, died in the Korean War. Very sad. Very sad. We're all still sad about the death of Archie's dad because that never stops being sad. And secondly, Archie admits to Veronica that he's never had a real girlfriend before because he's never met the right girl. It's because he's gay. It's because Archie's gay. Okay? But he's like, maybe you're the right girl, Veronica. He'll find out later. But they're interrupted because Cheryl storms in with her Hollywood magazines that her mother gave to her to prove that Veronica's not here to study small towns because she's going to be the star of our town. According to this Hollywood magazine, Natalie Wood's going to be the star of our town. Really, Veronica's here because her parents were so embarrassed by her being a party to James Dean's car accident. I shit you not, this is what it happens. This is the explanation. Her parents are so embarrassed by her being a party to James Dean's car accident that they have banished her to Riverdale because they don't want her to ruin their famous sitcom. Oh, Mija. Yes. So Archie takes Veronica home. They talk about how her parents are neglectful Hollywood losers, and she's sad about it. Archie's sympathetic. Archie goes home. He gets caught by his mom, who says, again, I took your car keys away from you because I didn't want you to die in a car accident like James Dean. I'm so upset about the car accident pictures of James Dean. Um, Please stop being dangerous, Archie. My husband literally died in the war. And Archie's like, oh yeah, I guess I did just talk about that with Veronica. I guess it would be sad if your son also died. Sorry, Mom. And Veronica gets a call from her parents that's basically like, no, we don't want you back, Veronica. But I know we'll see them again because Hiram is Hiram forever. Meanwhile, in the Emmett Till storyline, Betty has borrowed a pamphlet from Tony, which includes the famous, intensely disturbing photographs of Emmett Till's body. She looks at them while non diegetic track of strange fruit plays because this is Riverdale and you can only do the biggest, most obvious thing. And of course, she's deeply disturbed and moved by the photos. And she goes back to Tony and says, well, they won't let us talk about it on the news. They won't let us publish in the school paper. I've got a plan. We were going to get Cheryl, who does the morning announcements, to help us read Langston Hughes' poem about Emmett Till's death on the morning announcements. So Tony and Betty go get Cheryl, and they bully her, but she goes along with it, into letting them cook up a scheme that distracts Principal Featherhead and the secretary of the school, gets them out of the office at morning announcements time. And so Cheryl gives over the mic to Tony. Tony reads this famous poem by Langston Hughes. There's a whole montage of everybody in Riverdale High reacting to the undeniably powerful work of Langston Hughes. But in Riverdale now, Langston Hughes, now officially a figure who canonically exists in the world of Riverdale because of this scene, all reacting like, oh my god, I guess horrible lynchings and murder are bad and are a thing that's real. And yes, that's true. But I can't blame them for being shocked and hideously moved because as denizens of Riverdale, probably they've never heard a good poem before now. Probably they have no idea what good art is because they live in a weird camp nightmare. And so then because of Betty and Tony and Cheryl's hard work and bravery, and they had some help from Tabitha too, they have managed to start a conversation in English class about how lynching is bad and made an opportunity for the black students who had gone down to Mississippi to see the trial to get to speak to the class about what they saw. And Jughead's like, wow, because of the students of Riverdale here in the 1950s, we managed to start a conversation in this English class that probably wouldn't have happened for 40 more years. And you're like, oh no, I don't know what to do about where this storyline is going, and I'm scared. And you should be scared. You should be scared. Because Jughead goes back to Pops and he's having kind of a mental breakdown because he's like, oh, nobody else remembers the future 67 years ago in the past. That was the future. That was our real time. Maybe the future was all a dream. But then a different version of Tabitha appears. The real version of Tabitha, who is a time traveler and an angel, per last season. And she still remembers the real timeline, and she still remembers Jughead. And Jughead's like, take us home, Tabitha. But she can't, because the comet hit Riverdale and produced an extinction level event. So the reason they're in the 1950s is because at the last possible moment, Tabitha exerted all of her power, her time travel power, to send everyone back to the 1950s. And now she wanders the time stream, searching for a fixed future where And this, as she says, quote, "The comet didn't hit Riverdale to produce an extinction level event." And so while Tabitha wanders the time stream, going through all parallel universes, seeking the utopian future that may or may not exist, she has to leave her friends behind and this other version of herself that's a normal part of Riverdale. I don't know why there's two Tabithas, but it's fine. Tabitha's a great character. There could be two of her. She must leave her friends behind in the 1950s, but with a mission. For while Tabitha seeks the cured future, our heroes must remain in the 1950s. This time of intolerance and oppression, and ensure, and this is what Tabitha says. Tabitha says, quote, "As one of my heroes said, we must ensure that the moral arc of history bends towards justice." But Jughead has to forget the future because his remembering of the future is anomalous and causing damage to the time stream already again. So Tabitha gives him a magic kiss during the big synth part from a real human being, and he begins to forget everything, and his memories are fading, and he runs back to his abandoned train car to write down everything he can remember before he forgets, because Tabitha's the love of his life, and he doesn't want to forget her, and he doesn't want to forget all of the lives that he lived in the real future timeline, the future 67 years ago in the past, the future. But and he's typing furiously, but all he can get out before he forgets everything is just the words, "bend towards justice." And then he forgets everything. But on his desk, he finds his beanie from the future 67 years ago in the future. The Jughead, the Cole Sprouse Jughead beanie. And that's where the episode ends. That's what the episode ends with. What does this tell us? This tells us that there's a non-zero, significantly greater than zero chance that this season, the final season of Riverdale, will be about our heroes, inventing our heroes inventing social justice in their 1950s small town, and trying to fix the 1950s to fix the future, so that they don't have to live in our future. They're fixing time. They're fixing time to stop the Republicans. They're fixing time to stop the Republicans. Our heroes, Jughead has gone back in time to make sure Donald Trump never gets elected. And you might be thinking, this is a terrible idea. This is a terrible idea for a season of television. This is going to be the most cringe material ever committed to screen. And I will be there. I'm going to be there every step of the way. Every step of the way, because I have a belief. First of all, I believe in Roberto. I believe in Roberto. Secondly, I believe that Roberto is accessing some higher thematic shit with this idea than maybe even he knows how to control. I formulated this thought back last season in the episode called Angels in America, where that was a fail. Where Tabitha travels back in time to Riverdale at different times to battle racism, but the racism doesn't make any sense based on the periods where it's happening. Like in the 1950s, she goes back to the 1950s to stop them from voting to make Riverdale a sundown town. Emphatically not how sundown towns worked, but is a powerful, like, allegorical reinterpretation of how I think a lot of people are experiencing the relentless contemporary attacks on our civil rights here in America because they actually are voting on whether many of us should be allowed to exist. And I think Roberto is about to deliver something that is either so big brained or so stupid, or both, that it could permanently change. Okay, I won't say us. It could permanently change me. And that's what I'm awaiting. My life is in Roberto's hands. That concludes this episode of Ween Off the Cuff. I have been your Ween.